those of you new to Turkey, what we have today is a typical case of, if the holidays are starting tomorrow lunchtime, then perhaps I'd better get to the bus on Thursday. This is true, is it not? So only people who are stuck in Ankara are probably here today, so there we go. Right, well, if you remember, I hope, that in the last year of the excavation at Koyunjik, the site of Nineveh, Sir Henry Layard discovered what was clearly a royal library full of clay tablets, all with cuneiform writing on them. It took several years before these tablets could be read, of course, and it gave lots of evidence about the rulers of Nineveh, diplomatic relations with other rulers and so forth. But one particular group of tablets can be rather difficult to understand. They refer to a place called Sumer, an area of land, a group of people. Sumer, it was possible to locate Sumer. It had to be somewhere down in the lower Mesopotamia. Nineveh, of course, is right up here. So people wondered, who were the Sumerians? What was the land of Sumer? As it was in 1855, that's only 1 year after Layard stops working at Nineveh, Sir Henry Rawlinson begins to come up with an answer. Now this is the man, of course, who first translated cuneiform, identified 3 cuneiform scripts, and in his travels around lower Mesopotamia, he found some examples of a cuneiform script which he couldn't understand. It's in the right area for this to be Sumer. He looks at it. Some of the symbols used in cuneiform are the same as in Akkadian, but it's not Akkadian. So therefore, he concluded this was probably Sumerian, the language of the people of Sumer. As more and more work was done in the area, people began to discover that actually in the area of Sumer, there was a clear development in types of writing. But the early people of Sumer had basically used a pictograph script. This basically represents a head. So it's rather similar in some ways to hieroglyphics. But what was happening, what was clearly happening in Sumer, was that they were developing something we can call writing. The Sumerian script, Sumerian writing, is the oldest writing that we know of in the world. Well, this was a bit of a puzzle because you could see that some of the symbols have been taken, Akkadian had taken some of the symbols, so you could understand some Sumerian words, but it proved impossible to actually totally understand it until a discovery in, this one there, a discovery in Syria actually started to provide a clue. Well, Rawlinson and others could start to see a connection. So we're looking at here the word for head, an early pictograph in Sumer, a later one, it gets tilted on its side. Early cuneiform in Sumer, stylized head, it starts to get broken up. It's a bit hard to make this on a clay tablet, so it's easier just to go ding, 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 a few symbols. Late cuneiform in Sumer, and you can see how the Akkadian word for head has developed ultimately from the Sumerian pictograph there. Well, this was all very well and good. It was obviously a completely different language. That was the only problem. Then, as more and more work started to be done in that area, more and more tablets with pictographs Sumerian were found, and also cuneiform Sumerian. The big discovery in 1877 at a place called Tello, which we now know was called Gursu in Sumerian times, the discovery of a record office. Well, this is deep in Iraq, and it's being looted every day, and that's why I thought I'd put a different picture for you, just to show you what the site looks like now, with holes dug all over it, and being patrolled on a regular basis by the United States of America Army. The big change came towards the end of the 19th century. A dealer in Syria came up with a whole group of clay tablets, about 16 altogether. We don't know where they were found. We call them the Urhoboros glossary, because it proved to be a dictionary. A dictionary we can date to about 2300 BC, and it's a dictionary that gives you the Sumerian words or Sumerian cuneiform on one side and the Akkadian equivalents on the other. So this particular page actually tells you, gives you the Sumerian and the Akkadian for different types of stone. Well, this was a major discovery. People were now able to start understanding Sumerian to a certain extent. And it's a bit of a problem. It's the oldest known written language. It's an agglutinative language, so rather like Turkish, you start off with a base word and you add on a whole load of suffixes to that. But it is unique. There's no other language which is structured in the same way. It doesn't fit in with anything at all. The Akkadians spoke a Semitic language. They took the idea of cuneiform writing from the Sumerians. They adopted several Sumerian cuneiform symbols, and we see in later Sumerian Akkadian symbols appearing in their tablets as well. So Akkadian starts to replace Sumerian as the main spoken and written language in Lower and Upper Mesopotamia. Sumerian continued to be used, mainly for sacred ceremonial services, for some literary and scientific languages as well. It's rather like in the Roman Catholic Church, people sometimes still use Latin. It's rather like in the Coptic Church. Coptic is the language of the church, but most Christian Egyptians don't speak Coptic. They only know it from the church. The same with Syriac. There are very few Syriac speakers in southern Turkey and northern Syria, but people who go to church will know Syriac from the use of Syriac in religious services. The great thing about being able to now read and understand Sumerian was that you could start putting place names on the map. And this is a map of early Mesopotamian city-states, as identified from various tablets in Sumerian. It is possible to basically give a name to a whole series of sites, and it slowly became clear that one site known locally, Talal-Muqayyar, was a place called in Sumerian Ur-Kashidim. Ur-Kashidim. Ur is a prefix which means the city. Go back here, we have a place, for example, called Uruk. So Ur is basically a prefix meaning the city, but this is Ur by itself, the single Ur. Well, the Bible and the Quran both talk about a place called Ur-Kashidim, the Chaldees, as we would say in English, the home of the prophet Abraham before he left this part of Mesopotamia to make his way to Haran, now inside Turkey. Well, we're still talking about a period when many scholars in Europe were obsessed with finding evidence for the Bible. And needless to say, lots of governments tried to convince the Ottoman government that they should be allowed to send their National Museum representatives to this particular site, Al-Muqayyar, and then they could excavate it and find the Chaldee, and hopefully evidence for Abraham himself. But for one reason or another, the Ottoman government were not particularly keen on this, and then the First World War came along, and that stopped any further discussion. But at the end of the First World War, what had been the province of Mesopotamia and the Ottoman Empire became the Kingdom of Iraq. And the Kingdom of Iraq was set up by a group of British people here. You might recognise some of these people. There's the young Winston Churchill sitting down there. There's T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. But this is the person I really want you to bear in mind. This is the woman who is really responsible for Iraq being formed from Sunni, Shia and Kurds. We don't really always get on with each other in Iraq, not even today. This is Gertrude Bell. Gertrude Bell is the first real female archaeologist. She's travelled a lot around the Middle East, particularly in southern parts of Turkey. Our earliest archaeological records for the southeast of Turkey are all thanks to Gertrude Bell. We call her Dirty Gertie, just for short. She used to travel with a very thick skirt and a manservant on her donkey. But she was appointed to the commission to establish what became the Kingdom of Iraq, and we'll see her here with the first King of Iraq, King Faisal. And she was also appointed the Archaeological Commissioner for Iraq. Well, being British, she naturally said somebody British should excavate the site. Iraq's basically under Iraqi control, and so she has this man, Leonard Woolley, so Leonard Woolley as he later became. Leonard Woolley, classic picture in many people's eyes of what an archaeologist should look like, except he doesn't have a beard. And those beautiful white shoes, his socks up to his knees and his shorts down to his knees. You get sunburned knees, but you can't get any sunburned. Well, Leonard Woolley was actually the assistant to Arthur Evans in the Ashmolean Museum. All these things connect together in many ways. And Leonard Woolley had been sent out to Turkey before the First World War, where he worked at a very important Neo-Hittite site of Chaldees. You see him here with T. Lawrence from Lawrence of Arabia. Basically, as I've mentioned before, archaeologists often tend to be used as spies, and the whole reason for working at Chaldees was to discover about the Neo-Hittites, but also to keep an eye on the construction of the Istanbul-Baghdad railway line. So that's one of the reasons they were there at Chaldees. And Woolley in 1922, thanks to Gertrude Bell, is given a lifetime's opportunity to go and excavate at Ur. He's funded by the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania. The finds are still divided between the British Museum, the University of Pennsylvania, and the National Museum of Iraq. He went out to Tel al-Makyar and realised that it had to be basically a ziggurat with the city of around it. He first started work by cleaning up the ziggurat, so you see it here in 1922, at the end of his first season of campaign. Built of mud brick, covered with sand, which is why it looked like a tell to the Arabs. Ziggurats, we've got some idea of their appearance from descriptions provided by Greek travellers in the 3rd and 4th centuries BC, so we know it would have originally looked like this. It's a series of platforms with a temple on the top, more imaginative reconstruction of it there. If you ever get the chance to go to Ur, if you want to go to southern Iraq, you can actually see it restored by Saddam Hussein, who put his name on all the bricks involved in the restoration process. You can get there fairly easy with United States Air Force flights, because it's the major Air Force base for the United States at the moment. That's what we see here. You get some idea of the scale. And most of the tourists at the moment are, in fact, United States soldiers. Well, so much for the ziggurat. He starts working on the ziggurat. He clears away the sand. He finds what he expects to find. Then Woolley starts working on the edge of the city of Ur. He's working in what was a rubbish dump in much later times. But he realises that rubbish dumps are often on top of much older cemeteries. And he thinks he might have a cemetery there. So he starts his workman on that site, and then discovers he's got a big problem. His workmen, of course, have no experience in archaeology. The moment they find a piece of gold, and they start finding pieces of gold, they'll start digging madly. At this point, Woolley calls in a man called Hamoudi. Hamoudi is a native of Chaldees, now on the border between Turkey and Syria. He'd been the excavation supervisor at Chaldees, and he comes out to supervise and train the workers there. Woolley also realises the site is just a little bit too big for one person, so he appoints another archaeologist as his co-director, a man called Max Mallowan, although he's better known as Mr. Agatha Christie. He was married to the crime novelist Agatha Christie. And here you see Woolley with brown shoes on this time, not white shoes, but still the same pair of socks up to the knee, Agatha Christie and Max Mallowan. By this stage, the workers are beginning to get a bit more experience. So in about 1925 or so, he starts to excavate an area of buildings. In that area of buildings, he recovers evidence for some very well preserved buildings that belong to the period of about 2000, 1700 BC. This is the time of the prophet Abraham. Woolley is the son of a Christian priest. He trained to become a priest himself. So he announces his discovery to the newspapers as, I have found a house of the time of prophet Abraham. But ever since then, it's always been known as the house of Abraham. And here we see Agatha Christie in the centre there, looking at the remains. This is what it looks like today, with the American base in the background there. Again, now under the care of the United States of America Army. By the time they finished work on the House of Abraham, or as Woolley called it, a house from the period of the time of the prophet Abraham, the workers were skilled enough, so he started to take them back to the cemetery area. This was in 1927, and in the first 3 months of working in the cemetery area, he excavated 600 ordinary graves. Skeletons in simple graves, pieces of pottery, sometimes weapons, but not much more. In the end, he excavated 1,830. Then he started to find evidence of much deeper graves, very large pits, dug into the ground. He suspected that these might be graves. He didn't know, but very large rectangular pits, measuring something like 10 by 20 meters. He thought that these might be the graves of the rulers of Ur, the royal graves. Well, this is the work starting on that cemetery in 1927. As you can see, Woolley has managed to roll up his shorts just a little bit, so he's getting a little bit more sunburn on his work there. This is a view over the royal graves as you see them today, with the ziggurat in the background there. What he discovered was that there was a ramp, a slope going down into these graves, which he didn't bother to properly excavate. He basically cut steps down into them like this. Some of these graves, or some of these large pits, turned out to be something like 15 metres deep, 10 metres deep or more. One of the first graves, or what he thought was a grave he excavated, proved to be full of skeletons. Skeletons of soldiers with their weapons, copper spears, copper daggers and things like that. Skeletons of women wearing jewellery. Nothing else, just large numbers of skeletons. He started to think that these must be victims of a sacrifice. So at this point he starts talking about the death pits. And here we have one of the death pits up under excavation. You can't see the skeletons there, he's got these little sections around there. But the whole base of this grave, this is actually one he excavated much later. It had something like 74 skeletons in it altogether. Then he started to find some of the graves actually had a mud brick burial chamber to one side. And that inside these, although they'd all been robbed, all the first ones he excavated had been robbed of their contents, there were still scraps of gold left in some of them. So he began to think, these must be the royal graves. This is one of the royal graves on one side of one of the death pits, if you like, again under the care of the United States Army today. Well, as I said, most of these graves had been robbed of their contents. But in some cases, the robbers hadn't got everything. And Woolley was lucky enough when he excavated PG, Palace Grave 755, to find this, a gold helmet. Ceremonial helmet, the body is still with it, with an inscription on it in Sumerian saying that it belonged to a man called King Meshkalam. This was the bit of evidence, if you like, he really needed. These were royal graves. They weren't just simple graves or of nobles or something like that. These were actually the graves of the kings and queens, possibly the queens of Ur. So he was very happy about this discovery. Immediately started work on the next of what seemed to be the very large graves. This was PG779. PG779 had also been very badly robbed, but he excavated this much more carefully than he had done before. What he found was a sloping entrance with a set of steps and the bodies of 4 men with weapons, obviously soldiers who were symbolically guarding the entrance to the tomb. He went inside the tomb and found again it had been very badly robbed. There were a few bits and pieces lying about, but it was in here that he found his first really major discovery. It had been a wooden box, decorated with lapis lazuli and ivory and things like that. The wood had decayed, but he was able to recover this particular wooden box, which he thought might be a ceremonial standard or flag. Well, evidence that these men at the front were soldiers provided by a bronze breastplate. This is what he found inside the tomb, the standard of Ur. The robbers hadn't bothered to take this away, it wasn't valuable to them. But it is one of the really most significant pieces of Sumerian art that's actually survived for us. We still don't know what it is. It's basically a wooden box with a triangular shape. It's covered with an inlay of lapis lazuli, bluestone, which you can see there, ivory and white shell, and also some red stones, carnelian stones as well. It's dated roughly to about 2650 BC, but it really is a superb piece of work. It's not very big, it's only about that long and that high, and if you want to see it, you have to go to the British Museum. The standard of Ur, the two opposite sides are decorated with scenes of war and the peace that follows war. So we'll just look briefly at the war side of the standard of Ur, just to give you some idea of the quality of this. And this very unusual art style. As I said, it's not terribly big. It's less than a metre long. It's only about probably about 30 centimetres high, 30 or 40. The war side starts off basically with the Sumerian royal army going to war. Here we've got the war wagon of the Sumerian army, an early form of tank, if you like, or a type of chariot. The driver, the spear thrower, spears at the front, pulled by donkeys, and one of the dead enemy in front being trampled underfoot. And we have a scene of the Sumerian army on the march with characteristic, possibly helmets, they might just be hoods, obviously we don't really know, but clearly dressed in the same identical way with this characteristic skirt and a cloak over that. We have a picture of a Sumerian soldier, several actually, of Sumerian soldiers about to cut the head off a prisoner of war. You see the prisoner trying to escape there. The soldier's lifted off his coat, about to cut his head off with this very characteristic shaped sword, which you only find in Sumerian context. Then at the end of the whole procession, what we find is the king standing there, waiting for the prisoners of war to be brought to him. This is the king's own particular war wagon, and here we have the king, not terribly well preserved. We don't know who it is. There's the king, shown more than life size, more larger than everybody else, holding a spear, and here you have Sumerian soldiers bringing the prisoners in front of him. We don't know what war this refers to, we don't know what battle it refers to. It's a battle probably with a neighbouring city. If we look at the costume of the prisoners, they're wearing this triangular pointed garment. So obviously this is meant to show that these are enemies, recognisable enemies. But after war, victory comes peace. And the other side of the standard of Ur is equally remarkable. It shows the celebration after the battle has been won. So you see row after row of people bringing in various types of food, a sacrifice for a ceremonial meal. So you have somebody bringing in a ram here, you've got a cow there, somebody somewhere holding fish, but I think that's on the main picture. You've got some sheep being brought in, another cow there. They're all being taken in for the big party. The big party afterwards, and here we see the king sat down, showing larger than everybody else. In front of him was two of his servants, presumably bringing him cups or food or something like that. The royal officials, of course, all sat down here, all with this very characteristic shape of cup, and we'll see an example of this a little bit later. At the end of that scene, you have a lyre. A lyre, a stringed instrument with a wooden sound box, tuning forks or tuning keys at the top like that. This is really quite an important pitch on the standard there, as you'll realise as we go further into this class. Well, unfortunately, that grave had been pretty badly robbed, so there was not much left apart from the standard of which is a truly remarkable piece of Sumerian art. But the next big grave he excavated, 789, can be dated to about 2600, proved to be much more remarkable in many ways. This was a grave that again contained a large number of skeletons, entered by a ramp with, at the body, at the entrance, the skeletons of 6 men, soldiers wearing copper helmets with copper spears. Inside it, the bodies of 4 oxen, which were used for pulling sledges and carts and things like that. And then, by the side of these sledges and carts, 3 skeletons, the people who looked after these particular wagons. And then, behind that, 54 skeletons, all lined up in a neat little way, as if everybody had just been placed there, just like that. Well, this made would begin to wonder what on earth was going on here. But the most remarkable thing, of course, was being able to reconstruct the ceremony. The only reason that these people were volunteered to be sacrificed, or were forced to be sacrificed, basically went into the death pit outside the tomb and waited patiently until they died, probably from drinking poison or something like that. You're able to get this very vivid reconstruction drawing that's based on what actually remains. The women are all wearing jewellery. The soldiers are probably armoured, they've got their helmets on, they've got their spears. You've got male servants as well as female servants there. Mixed in with the remains of the body, the main grave had been robbed. There was nothing left of that. But mixed in with the bodies of all these servants and soldiers was the wooden remains and the lapis lazuli with the decoration of a lyre, what we know just a great lyre. This is again one of the most remarkable pieces of archaeological work or archaeological finds from the Sumerian period, from the whole Middle East. The Great Lyre is very elaborately decorated. You've got a gold bull's head at the front of it. You've got ivory horns on the bull's head. You've got lapis lazuli used for the beard there. The inlay to decorate the wooden case, lapis lazuli, white shell, carnelian, and up the front, a really remarkable scene, which is known of from Sumerian mythology. This represents something in Sumerian mythology known as the master of animals. And we've got this god-type creature up here called the hairy man. And as you can see, he's holding 2 bulls, got the human heads on them. And here we have all the animals coming to serve him, worship him. Think of Orpheus in the classical world. Orpheus, the master of all the animals come to listen to him. Well, this is a much earlier version. So we've got a jackal here, one of the wild dogs of the desert, carrying a folding table probably. And on the table you've got a couple of heads that might be rhytons, drinking cups, but that's obviously a piece of meat there. We've got a lion coming up behind with a large jar, and a small bowl with a handle, a ladle for pouring things from that. Down here you've got what seems to be an ass playing a lyre, supported by a spotted hyena, and there is a small baby jackal or something sitting down at the bottom there. Then you've got this half man, half scorpion figure coming in, and at the back a goat carrying two of these characteristic Sumerian cups. We'll see an example later, and behind him a child there. Well, this particular story, the story of Ramu, the hairy man, is known off from mythology, but nobody had ever seen this particular scene before. And obviously, as I hinted at, we can see the origins of the story of Orpheus, who charmed all the animals in Greek and Roman mythologies. The same type of being in many ways. Well, a very remarkable thing, very remarkable great lyre. The largest of several lyres that were found at the site. The quality of this indicated a person of great importance. Where does lapis lazuli come from? Afghanistan. Where do the red stones come from? Used along the side of the box. What about India and Pakistan? Gold, ivory. Ivory has to come from elephants, so either from India or it's come from Africa. The central part of the grave, everything had gone. All that was left was a few bits and pieces, but it did include a wooden gaming board. This is a type of game that, believe it or not, was played throughout the Middle East and into Egypt in ancient times. It's last recorded as having been played by the Jewish community who lived at a place called Koshin in India in the early 20th century. We can reconstruct the game to a certain extent. It's obviously a kind of game of possession. We've got these different marked squares there, and I do recommend you have a look at this on the internet and find out more about the game of 20 squares there. The next grave, which we excavated, was actually beneath this one, 779. Grave 800 had not been robbed. The robbers had gone into 779 and didn't realise it was over another grave. So this was the big find. Well, again, it's the usual type of arrangement. What you find is an entranceway with the skeletons of soldiers who'd been guarding the entranceway. Within the grave itself, we've got the skeletons of several young women, I think how many altogether, 12 young women who are actually facing towards this whole area where you've got a buried animal, you've got must have been a wooden chest, probably with textiles in it, and then the actual grave chamber at the end here. Well, this hadn't been touched. Nobody had looted this, nobody had found this. What does Ruby find? Each one of the 12 women is wearing an incredibly elaborate headdress made of gold. The skull has been crushed, that's by the weight of the soil, not by anything else. All the women are wearing elaborate necklaces of gold with carnelian stones, lapis lazuli as well. That is what the headdress would have looked like when actually normal life. This is the jewellery that was worn by each of these 12 women who are lying in that burial. Gold and lapis lazuli bracelets like this. Gold is not found in Mesopotamia. The only source of gold at this period is Egypt. Lapis lazuli, not found in Mesopotamia, found in Afghanistan. The attendants were wearing elaborate necklaces of gold and lapis lazuli beads, and bracelets which had gold, lapis lazuli and other stones, and this red stone, carnelian stone, which comes from India at this particular time. Mixed in with the remains of these 12 women were 3 wooden objects, or rather 1 silver and 2 wooden objects. This is a photograph of them as they were found. One was a silver lyre, which you can just see here. The wooden box had been covered with silver. Another one was a wooden lyre, and But again, the shape was preserved because of the decoration on the side of the box, and it was also the remains of what was a heart. Well, Willie was able to excavate these and have them restored. So we can see what the silver lyre looks like, and it's the same basic shape as before, slightly different decoration on the front, but the bull's head there, the sound box, everything fits in very neatly. The wooden lyre, known as the Queen's lyre, made of wood, but with gold wrapped around the wooden parts on either side there, with cornelian and shell inlay and a gold bull's head. That's what it looked like until 2003. And you may remember with the fall of Baghdad, the National Museum in Iraq was left unguarded, and looters broke in, stole rather a lot and smashed a lot of it. But it has been restored since then. Just a reminder of what can happen in times of conflict. The wooden heart, as you can see here, with a lapis lazuli inlay, and again with gold decoration and silver tuning is there. A really remarkable discovery. If this wasn't enough, what about the contents of the grave proper, burial chamber? Well, inside this there was a skeleton of a woman on a wooden bed. Next to the wooden bed was the most important piece of evidence, or what we call a cylinder seal. They're only about 1 to 2 centimetres high, less than half a centimetre in diameter. These are the personal property of an individual, used to mark what belongs to them. Rolled out like this on a piece of wax or clay, and what this actually had on it were pictographs that gave the name Queen Puabi. So we have a name for the person buried there. Queen Puabi, according to the cylinder seal, was the wife of a man called Lugal. The grave above Queen Puabi's grave, probably Lugal's grave. But that's completely wrong. PG 799, completely wrong. So perhaps the fellow person Lugal. Well, this is Queen Puabi as she was found. Again, the skull has been completely crushed by the weight of soil. But you can see these enormous gold earrings she's wearing. Gold and lapis lazuli necklace, just like the ones the attendants have, but much larger, much more impressive, and a really elaborate headdress. That's what the headdress looked like. Beautifully made of gold, lots of rings going around it, and you can see the large earrings there. She had extra ear piercing going down the top of her ear as well. There's nothing new in the world today. People having lots of ear piercings. It goes back quite a long time to Sumerian time. This is a view from the back, so you've got a rather elaborate hair comb type of effect there. Her body was covered with, you can call it a cape, just a decorative collection of stones, semi-precious stone, originally on string, which of course is now gone. This is the part of the cape. That's her waist belt there. You can see some of her bracelets, some of her necklaces on the top, her hairpins as well. This is what she was buried in. Well, the cape uses a wide variety of precious and semi-precious materials. So you've got lapis lazuli, you've got gold, you've got carnelian and agate. Agate, again, a stone which had to be imported to Earth. It doesn't occur anywhere in Mesopotamia. This is what it would have looked like originally. The cape would have weighed 7 kilos. It's quite a lot to wear. We don't know if it was just for her burial or if it was some form of ceremonial dress or not. But Queen Puabi was buried wearing all this, plus a lot of other things. Next to her bed were 2 dead servants lying there, but a small table which had a wide range of other decorative items that clearly belonged to her. So there were 2 diadems or necklaces. People argue about this. They might have been worn in the hair, they might have been worn around the neck. Another necklace of gold and lapis lazuli beads, gold bracelet there, and that's my favourite. It's actually only that big. It's her cosmetic kit with her blue eyeliner in it. So absolutely nothing new. 2600 BC. Scattered around the burial chamber were again a wide variety of objects. I'm just going to show you a selection. There was, for example, the silver wine jug standing about that high. Silver is not found in Mesopotamia. There's this marble jar here, probably used for cosmetics, but a type of marble that is not found in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is basically sand and limestone, and lots of mud along the sides of the river Euphrates and Tigris. Lapis lazuli. Well, today, if anybody came up to you with a piece of lapis lazuli that big, you would be talking about paying the better part of $250,000 just to buy the piece. Because lapis lazuli doesn't turn up in big pieces. So you can get some idea of the value of this. A gold cup, exactly like the one we saw on the Great Lyre, and that we've seen the standard of there. An obsidian bowl. Obsidian comes from Anatolia. A small gold drinking bowl as well. Go with that. It's just a small selection of what's found there. Scattered on the floor, not far away, were a little series of decorative things, including her second best headdress. This is the one she wore when she didn't feel particularly happy, or just had a bad day or something like that. It's not bad, is it? Again with more jewellery, carnelian gold, lapis lazuli. The second headdress, more lapis lazuli in it, a much simpler affair altogether, much closer to the type of headdress worn by the attendants. Still a very elaborate piece of workmanship. Well, by this time, Rudy, in his own words, is getting fed up with finding gold. Totally fed up. But he carries on excavating. And he finished off his excavation with the discovery of PG1237, better known as the Great Death Pit. The Great Death Pit of Ur, excavated 1928-29, contained the skeletons of 6 men and 68 women, all neatly laid out in rows with their legs slightly flexed there. The women all had headdresses like the attendants on Queen Puabi's grave, but rather smaller. The men were all armed with weapons as well. There were the remains of one small wheeled vehicle in there, but other than that, there was nothing. This was a death pit. This wasn't a burial place of a ruler. This was a pit with 68 women and was it 6 soldiers in it. Just then, some of the women with small cuts by the side of it. But in this particular pit is where Woolley made his third most famous find after the standard there on Queen Puabi. And that was this. 2 of them actually. 2 statuettes standing about so high. A wooden body, which of course had disappeared, but covered with lapis lazuli, gold, ivory, white shell, and it was possible to actually reconstruct them and look at this. This is one of them. This is the 2 of them up together. It's slightly different appearance. This one's in the British Museum. That one's in the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Their probable function was to support the probable function, but we don't know for certain. But the amazing thing is, of course, that the actual scene that we have here, and what we have, let's go back to that one, is what seems to be a sheep or a ram eating the leaves from a tree. Is a very famous biblical site. This immediately became known as the statuette representing the ram caught in the thicket, in the tree, when Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac. An appropriate time to talk about this, just before Kurban Bayram. So this caught the public's imagination more than anything else. This is proof of the biblical connections there. It's not, of course, because Abraham left Ur to go to Haran and then went further south than that. This really caught the public's mind no more than anything else. By the time he finished excavating the Great Death Pit, Woolley really was fed up with finding remarkable objects. So he decided to dig a bit deeper. And he excavated beneath the levels connected with the house of Abraham and found that this series of buildings had been constructed on mud, river mud. So he thought, what's going on here? He started to dig down deeper. He found that there was 3.5 meters of mud sealing an earlier settlement. Well, Woolley, of course, remember, the son of a Christian priest. He trained to become a Christian priest himself. He knows his Bible. Everybody knows his Bible. He also knows the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest piece of literature that survives today. In its earliest form, we have it probably composed about 2100 BC or a little bit later. It survives, fortunately, in Akkadian copies. And it's a story connected with the creation of the world, creation of cities and so forth. But the Epic of Gilgamesh does talk about a great flood that covered the land of Lower Mesopotamia. This same story is basically repeated in the Bible. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, we get, I think it's Gilgamesh himself, is put in a basket and he floats away on the river. In the Bible you have Moses placed in a basket and he floats away on the river. In Rome you've got Romulus and Remus in a basket floating away on the river. Well, when Woolley saw he had 3.5 meters of river mud over an earlier settlement, this is naturally what he thought of. He argued from this that the story of the Great Flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh and in the Bible was based on a real event. But what you have to take into account, which is what Woolley realised, is that there could have been a major river flood that would have affected the whole of Mesopotamia, Lower Mesopotamia. Lower Mesopotamia is the centre of civilization. It's where we have the ancient cities. So you can see how this gets into people's imagination. The world has been flooded. The known world has been flooded. Well, once he completed his work at Ur, Woolley then sat down to start writing up his results. Excavations at Ur being published in 1954. In this, he drew attention to the importance of Ur. He made the point, although he wouldn't have used the phrase himself, this is the earliest example we have of a global economy. Ur is down here. The fertile Euphrates Tigris Valley. Easy to grow crops. No problem with that. No natural resources. Where do the people get their gold from? Egypt. Where do they get their copper from? Cyprus, possibly Anatolia. Where does obsidian come from? Anatolia. Silver, from the border between Turkey and Syria. Carnelian, Pakistan. The rulers of Ur, 2600 BC, were the centre of the world economy. We don't know what they could trade. Probably foodstuffs, probably cloth. We can't be certain whatsoever. But they can get all these things, including lapis lazuli from way over there in Afghanistan, because of what they can get. So Woolley made that point, but what he could never quite come up with was an explanation for the sacrifice ceremonies. He was rather horrified at this. He could see the death pits might be voluntary deaths. He argued from the way that the people were lying that they probably drank poison or something like that and went to sleep before they actually died. He suggested that there must have been a big funeral feast and then the sacrifice. Well, that sounds quite nice in many ways. And it did sound very nice until 2 years ago when they did some research on the skull of one of the soldiers found in the burial pit. He'd had the back of his head smashed in with an axe. And it seems that the bodies of the women had already been mummified before they were put there. So they had died before the big party. There you are! Something to give you bad dreams. Well, wonderful